For some Christian traditions, for many Christian traditions, the most important thing about Jesus is his death. And for us, the most important thing is his life. Unitarians and Universalists long have held that Jesus was a teacher and a prophet. Prophet not meaning someone who makes predictions about the future, but someone who names a new kind of possibility for this present world. And his teaching, as a Jew in a state where Roman occupiers enforced their supremacy through brutal violence, his teaching, right in the middle of that, spoke to a different kind of life that could be lived here and now. A sort of a banquet where everyone was welcome and everyone belonged and everyone counted and everyone mattered and everyone was cared for. Not because you are already good or perfect, or they were very selective about who they let in the door. Not even because you do a really good job of pretending how perfect you are, but because none of us is the worst day of our life. Because all of us are broken and all of us are beloved. And so, of course, all of us count. Jesus taught that right here in this world is an invitation to a kind of grace, a kind of love that meets you exactly where you are and doesn't leave you there. And if what I'm describing does not sound like the Jesus you grew up with, well, yeah, it's not the Jesus you grew up with. The roots of our tradition are in a Christianity that did not put death and resurrection at the center, but life and care at the center. And he taught that often in parables. Now, I should say, for those of you maybe who are here for the first time, we have many different theologies in this house, united by a shared set of values. So if you are surprised to come into a Unitarian Universalist congregation and hear me preaching on Matthew 20, everybody else is surprised too. You're in good company. But this parable there in Matthew 20, parables are riddles. They're dilemmas, they're stories told in a way that sort of upsets your notion of what's normal and taken for granted. This parable is usually called The Laborers in the Vineyard. The title of every parable could probably be, what you think is going on here is not really what's going on here, so take a minute and just kind of ponder on it, which is not catchy. This parable is usually called The Laborers in the Vineyard. It's Matthew chapter 20. One commentator says this one could be titled Debating a Fair Wage. It could be titled How to Prevent Peasants from Unionizing. But it goes like this. He's describing what is the kingdom of heaven like. He's out there talking and preaching about this kingdom of heaven, this different order, this different way of being in the world together. Someone says, what's it like? And he gives this very long and indirect story. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like this. It's like a householder who goes out in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. Vineyard owner goes out to hire day laborers, right? And agreeing with the workers for the denarius of the day. The denarius is the unit of currency. So this is the standard day's wages, a denarius. Agreeing with them that that's what he was going to pay them, he sent them to the vineyard to work. And then going out around the third hour of the day, he saw others standing in the marketplace without work. And he says to those, you go, even you, go into the vineyard, whatever is just for your labor, I'll give it to you. And they went. And he does the same thing again at the 6th hour of the day and at the 9th hour of the day and around the 11th hour of the day. So, I don't know, it's like 6 or 7 in the evening. The sun is definitely on its way down. He goes back to the marketplace again and found others standing there. And he says, why are you all standing here all day without work? And they say to him, very sensibly, because no one has hired us. And he says, all right, well, you go then, even you. You'll go into the vineyard. When evening came and the work stops for the day, says the Lord of the vineyard to his steward, to his foreman, call the workers forward and give them their wage, give them their reward, beginning with the last ones, the 11th hour show-ups, and all the way back then to the first. And so those who had come around the 11th hour each received a denarius, which is to say a full day's wages, despite having been there for, 90 minutes or something. And so the people who got there at 6 a.m. were excited by this, figuring they were going to receive even more. And they get to the front of the line, and they also get a denarius, a day's wages. And receiving them, I love this translation, they were grumbling. They were grumbling against the householder. You know this because you too have grumbled. They were saying, these last ones did 1 hour, and you've made them equal to us, the ones who bore the burden of the day and the burning heat. And the owner of the vineyard, answering one of them, says, "Friend, not do I harm you. Did you not agree with me on a denarius? Take what is yours and go. And I wish to give this one, I wish to give this last one, even as I've given to you." Or, he says a little snarkily, "Is it not permitted to me to do what I wish with what is mine? Or is your eye evil because I am good?" Maybe it could be called Lessons for Labor and Management. A whole lot of 2,000 years of interpreters read this passage often about what's happening after we die, who's going to be saved and not saved, and even like latecomers to Christianity are going to be okay. But the Jewish scholar Amy Jo Levine, who writes this wonderful book looking at the parables and putting them in the context of a first century Jewish occupied state, she writes this. She says, what happens if we change the theological focus? The parable could be about salvation, but Jesus, she says, was much more interested in how we love our neighbor than how we go about getting into heaven. In this reading, she suggests, a reading seeking the voice of Jesus, the storyteller, the message is not about what happens after death or the end of the world, but economics. This is not a story, she says, about salvation in the world to come, but the even more pressing question of salvation in the present. To those, she says, who ask today, "Are you saved?" I feel like I don't get this very often in Boulder, but every so often you run into someone whose first question, a stranger, "Are you saved?" To that sort of a question, she says, Jesus might well respond, the better question is, do your children have enough to eat? Do you have shelter for the night? And that's what this parable is doing, asking those more pressing questions. The laborers say, fairness is equal pay for equal work, right? If one person works 10 times as much, they ought to be paid 10 times as much. But the householder responds by saying, look, we made a fair contract. I paid you fairly for a day's work. This is what we agreed to at the start. You said it was fair. We did the work. You aren't resentful because you didn't get enough. You're resentful because you didn't get more. You're not resentful because you were treated unfairly. This is not the same as like women making 70% of what men make for the same job. You laborers are resentful because I was generous with the latecomers. Maybe a better title for the parable is, what does fairness even mean? The suggestion here is that fairness in pay isn't just about, the prevailing local wage rate and clocking in and out. It's not just about when you show up and how long you work. It's that regardless of whether you show up at dawn or you can't find work all day, you get paid enough to live on, which is not the world that we actually live in, right? This is not how pay works. This is not how employment works. He's describing instead what the beloved community looks like, what the kingdom of heaven looks like, which is not a place, but a quality of relationship between people, something that happens between us when we see each other differently, something that doesn't come about through revolution, but through evolution, when we see in each other a full humanity and a solidarity, each of us with everyone, and then go about making a social order that actually believes in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. In the beloved community, in this kingdom of heaven he's describing, the question is not, the important question is not why did they get more, it's did they get enough? It's is everyone okay? It's what do we need to do so people don't starve? It's an order where there are no disposable people. This is Jesus the prophet describing how the world could be, saying, look, the whole point is to take care of everyone. And this is not like Jesus, the generous capitalist. This is not Jesus, the secret Marxist. Ooh. This is just a rabbi reminding us that the kind of justice we actually believe in at the heart of things challenges the way the status quo of the world is ordered, challenges common sense notions of fairness, asks a different kind of question, tells us that a nation cannot be great when the people who pick the food can't afford to buy it, tells us that a rich man cannot love his neighbor as himself and let his neighbor starve, tells us that we are not at liberty to shake our heads and say, well, I guess the way things are is just kind of the way they have to be. He teaches, I think, in this sort of a parable, this challenging sort of a parable, because he's not really interested in like negotiating the tax policy implications of his program here. He's telling us that our notion of fairness is broken and calling us instead into solidarity, that human needs, human dignity unites us. And sometimes we think about justice as primarily like a political problem, a technical problem, an allocation problem. If we just had enough data and had the right kinds of programs going in the right... he's not like disagreeing with that. He's just saying before any of those things, justice is a spiritual problem. It's an internal problem. It's a heart problem. And that's what this parable is trying to readjust us to. No man is an island, says John Donne 4 centuries ago in England. No one's an island. No one stands apart outside of the order of things. We're woven together. And in southern Africa, the Nguni Bantu word Ubuntu is the word for humanity, and also a word that means I am because we are. I am because of you. I am because of us. The word for humanity, the word for what it is to be human is I am who I am because all of you who are who you are, and we're not separate from one another. Bishop Desmond Tutu says, a person with Ubuntu is open, is available to others, is affirming of others, isn't threatened that other people are able and good. And it's all based in this proper self-assurance that comes from knowing you belong in a greater whole, that you are diminished when others are humiliated and diminished, when others are tortured and oppressed. I am because we are. That's different than the laborers grumbling that latecomers got paid enough to survive on. John Donne in England, and Ubuntu philosophy in Southern Africa, these reminders of solidarity, of interconnection, they appear again and again in stories, in cultures around the world and across history, because I think they point to something real and easily forgotten. This message that shows up in our own tradition, in universalism, that there is nothing you can do to make yourself more or less human. You don't have to earn your dignity. You were born with it. You don't have to earn your worthiness. You don't have to prove it. You already have it right now, sitting in this room. And now you have a harder task, which is to live the rest of your life like that's really true for you and for everybody else, without exception. Beloved, the commitment we have as Unitarian Universalists to labor solidarity, to justice, to fairness made real in the public square, it's not because of our politics. And in fact, we often disagree deeply about how to make that real in public. But what is unshakable is the solidarity that for centuries, despite all the times we've fallen short, we declare that other people are real and worthy, and we ought to act like it. There is no me without us. It's deep down at the bottom of what we believe about how it is to be in the world. And you can find good and important resources to learn about how labor markets operate. And you can get degrees and read papers and work and care deeply about the policy that matters. And underneath every one of those things is a grounding in the reality and the worthiness of all people. What this world needs is anyone who will stand up to declare that justice, that fairness does not mean giving everyone an equal chance to starve. It doesn't mean that everyone will equally follow the same rules of a rigged game. What this moment requires, what the years ahead will require, as automation comes for jobs, as poverty deepens, as a global climate change rearranges the borders on the maps, what the years ahead will require of us is not to be the smartest or the most pure or the ones who have it all figured out. It requires us to be a people who say over and over and over again, I am because you are. One people, no one left behind. Amen.